Welcome, everyone. My name is Jerry Bone. I'm a farmer and cattle producer from South Central Kansas. I'm also serving as the president-elect of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association this year. I'm pleased to welcome you tonight to the webinar focused on today's volatile cattle market and how to navigate it. We are proud to be working with several industry leaders to bring you the latest on this topic. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen during the webinar, and at the end of the presentation, we will get to as many of those as time will allow. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you're joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded. It will be available for viewing in a few days at ncba.org. Just look for the producer tab on the website. Now I would like to thank our sponsor for this webinar, the National Corn Growers Association. The webinar tonight will feature Dr. Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist, and Don Close, Senior Animal Protein Analyst with Rabo AgriFinance. Don, the floor is yours.
Okay. I've got things strung out here that I'm having problems getting to my. All right. Thank you for having me with you this evening. I've looked forward to this and since I got the invitation. Thank you very much. Certainly, there's absolutely no shortage of the volatility in the market, and as we've all lived through on a day-to-day basis, if you don't like the market today, you'll see an entirely different set of circumstances for next week, and that's probably not going to go away anytime soon. The first chart that I've got this evening probably needs a little bit of explanation that you're not at the wrong webinar. But instead of trying to show a whole bunch of charts on GDP, on consumer spending, I was always taught that one of the most absolute responsive markets out there is the RV market, that it is the very first market to shut down sales when the economy starts to contract, and it's one of the very first ones when consumer confidence starts to increase. And the point to make with this one is, if you take the damage that has been done, excuse me, to the airlines, if you take the damage that has been done to oil and gas, the hospitality business, certainly the fine dining sector, even with the auto manufacturers, to think that we're going to go through this without any recessionary pressures on the market, both in the U.S. and in the global market, I just don't see how that's possible. And I'm not expecting to see, I'm not a second wave guy, certainly at this point in time, but it's one that's going to continue to be a concern to the market. When we talk about where we're at with the overall industry, clearly, I think there's a consensus that we peaked the expansionary cycle there in the second half of 2019, and think we're in position to see some contraction in the market. Where we're at today is we had been saying that we thought this down cycle in the market would be both short and shallow. And with the damage that has been done to the market because of the virus, I don't think we can be making that comment anymore. I think we need to be looking at a very conventional correction that will probably last 18 months to 2 years. Now, the one thing that we do with the work we've done in this market so far is we're really optimistic that we think we will hold, even with the correction, we will hold this market to between 30.5 to 31 million beef cows. And And I think that's really good news. If there is good news to bring out of that. And the reason that I say that, I think that's a comfortable level to keep our existing infrastructure in place, that we won't go through one of those gut-wrenching endeavors that we went through 2013, 2014, that we were closing plants, we were closing feed yards, that should provide a good enough volume of cattle to keep the system functional. I also like that 30.5 to 31 million beef cow base, because I think as we go through this corrective cycle, it's a large enough number, and certainly larger than where we're at with the 28.5, 29 million in 2014, that it will build a base that we can continue to see net expansion in the industry on the next up cycle. Oops. So we're not advancing.
Don, this is Jesse. I'll move your slides over to my screen and start sharing from there. Okay, Don, I got your screen up, but you are muted now. If you could unmute.
Okay. Now, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Maybe we got everything synced here. So when I gave the explanation I did with where we're at with the cycle and where we think we're at with the base of a cow number, one thing we've got to give consideration to is the escalation of the drought conditions across the West. Certainly that dry area, Colorado, western Kansas, and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. This one is really going to take some observation. I'm not yet to that point to think we've got dry conditions that will induce heavy liquidation of cows, but it's one we got to keep an eye on. The one thing too I would say with this is that if you just take where that distribution of cows, and if you were to draw an imaginary line basically from Fort Worth and up to Chicago, the number of cows east of that line is a way larger number than the cows through the western half. And I usually get a good argument started when I make that comment, but numerically it's true. So as long as we keep that east of the river as open as we are today, and certainly the improvement in conditions that we've had in that deep southeast in Florida over the last 30 to 45 days, I think that will prevent us from seeing an excess number of beef cows in the system. All right, Jesse, next. So when we take the cow number that we have today, we take the market conditions. The one of all classes of cattle that I have the deepest amount of concern for today is the calf market for this fall. And I may have the slides a little out of sequence for the explanation I'm going to give, but if you take the backlog of cattle, 1 million cattle that we have today, if you narrow that down to and look at fed cattle supply, you could argue that it's something under 1 million, but the difficulty that we're having getting cattle cleared from the feed yard that is creating problems for pen space to accept the number of feeder cattle. As that goes on through the summer, I think that's going to leave some vulnerability in the calf market as we go late summer and fall. Just looking at where we're at today, in that just shy of, let's just say the mid 160s, I think we could see that market in the 150 to 155 level as we get to that late summer and fall low. Next slide. On the feeder cattle, you can see that red dash line there in the mix of the last several years of prices and the 5-year. That was the first forecast that I released back at the first of the year. And you can see we went through January and early February, and things were rocking along just fine. And then we started to see the influence from the carcass weights were heavier than expected. We didn't really have the impact from the virus yet, but we were seeing a lot of influence from the extremely wide basis on the board and from the carcass weights that caused that market to start to really disappoint. Then we had that first announcement of the stay-at-home orders, and when we had the restaurants closed down, we had a really brief spike in retail buying that brought everything up. Then once we got to that announcement that we were seeing severe slowdowns and even closures of processing plants is when the market really went under pressure. I think $1.15 low in that April market was just simply overdone, both from just on price, but on the fear in the marketplace of the unknown of how long the virus would last. Since we put in that low in early April and the corrective rally we've seen, I could probably come back and argue today that the feeder market has rallied back too much too fast. I think we could see it level off and even have a modest correction here short term. But as we go forward, and look at, if we're talking the 128 feeder index that we had tonight, I think we could see that market flatten out. I think we'll still see that normal seasonal pattern from that March-May low into that August-September high. And our expectations are that we could see feeder cattle into the above the 135 to 140 level for an absolute high this fall. The one thing that I would differ with the forecast that's here, if you take the cleanup of the fed cattle supply that we should see in the fourth quarter, that could give enough support and loft to the market that we could finish out the year with feeder prices better than what the forecast line I have drawn in here today. All right, Jesse. So I'm going to convert and start talking fed cattle. In all of the years that I have been involved in the market, I have never seen a disruption in slaughter to the magnitude that when there in early April, we had that extreme slaughter that was 40% below a year ago. And, we just looked like the world was coming to an end. I think equally impressive as that precipitous decline is if you take where the industry chatter was even 3 weeks ago, that if we see slaughter recover to an 85 and then it kind of drifted to 90%, the fact that this quick we're back in a 95 to 96% of a year ago on a daily basis, that has been nothing short of amazing. Clearly the remaining 4 to 5 percentage points to get to a year ago will probably be the toughest percentages to recover. But we're going to go forward at this point in time and think that we will have a really tough time getting to 100% or even getting above 100% from a year ago. Next slide, please. So the real stumbling block that we're seeing in this market is that currently we've got carcass weights that are running right at 50 pounds over a year ago. And as you can see from looking at the chart, This thing is absolutely counter-seasonal. When we started January and February, I know clients would ask about what's going on with carcass weights. And for the longest time, I was given the excuse, look, I don't think it's that weights are necessarily that heavy this year as much as it reflects the incredibly difficult winter that we had a year ago, and expected it to get improved. It has. And to see that market hold that 40 to 50 pound increase over a year ago, even when we should be at our absolute seasonal low, it is reflective of the performance of the cattle this year. But it's also when you reduce slaughter by 40%, the backlog of cattle, the additional days on feed, this is what's going to happen. Now, I had an interesting conversation just earlier today with a client that was talking about that certainly the increase in weights is in the remainder of the yearling cattle, but as they we transition to slaughter of new crop calves, he wasn't seeing the variation in weights on the calves that we were seeing a year ago. I'm going to hold judgment on that one, but I do think this, that as we go forward, the ability to recover slaughter that we've already talked about, I do think you'll see that 45 to 50 pound increase that we're observing today will get back closer to it may remain high, but I think it will be closer to a historical norm. But just average carcass weight is going to be an issue that we have to deal with for the remainder of the year. Next slide, Justin. So that puts us in an incredibly unique situation. So we've got slaughter running measurably below a year ago levels, but we've got carcass weights now running, last week they were 2% above a year ago. And to be in a situation where slaughter is unchanged to below a year ago, but beef production on a weekly basis above a year ago, that will probably be a condition in the market for the remainder of the year. And that combined with the production from the other proteins, we're going to have a lot of product available. Next slide, please. So I had reservations to putting this slide in there, but I think it does bring out some very good points. Now, this is the projected break-even price is the blue line against the left axis. And the bars are the P&L per head on an unhedged basis. And certainly if you take the basis situation that we've dealt with for so much of this year, that changes that outcome dramatically. But I think, we've seen considerable losses build up as we have gone through this slowdown in slaughter. After we finished out last year with moderate pressure, but not deal breakers, but negative returns. Right at the end of the year, we thought we saw feeding margins turn positive. Really thought we were in a position for a positive outlook into spring. We're incredibly optimistic with the expectations from the trade deals that were completed in 2019. And then with the whole COVID situation, you can see the negative impact it's had on cattle feeding returns. Now, the point that I want to make with this is if you look at where the market's recovered to today, if you look at the expected reduction in break-even prices that really start to kick in September and basically for the remainder of the year, I still think there's some better opportunities for cattle feeders as we get later in the year. Next slide. So again, just like on the feeder cattle, you can see the dashed line up there and where I thought we could see fed cattle prices trade for 2020, and thought that we would be at that $1.30 level. Jerry Bone's going to remind me, I gave a presentation in Nebraska when the market was looking incredibly well, and made a case that we could exceed the 130, but only did that one spot, Jerry. But the performance of the market clearly, let's say the carcass weights through February, early March, that quick spike up when we saw that surge in cutout values with retail trade, and then the break in the market as a result of the plant slowdowns and closures. And then we had that influence in the market of packers improving bids as a reflection of the cutout values, and now seeing pressure on the market again. I think our expectation at this point in time is that we could see a summer low at the basically the 90-cent level, and it'd like to be 90.95. But if you take the 98 to $2 trade that been the bulk of this week's trade, if you take the considerations that we started this conversation with, just talking the risk of recession, you take the backlog of something just short of a million cattle, I think we're going to. I have a great deal of concern we could see a low in this market in the dead heat of summer, in that August period, in that 85 to 90 level. And the last point that I want to make with this slide is that's the projections that came from our year-to-date price. But I would also argue that our fourth quarter, as we see that supply of fed cattle start to clean up, I think we could see a fed cattle market back to 110. That's more optimistic than what this slide is reflecting, and possibly a pinch better than the 110 levels to close out the year. The one thing that I didn't bring out with this, we've spent a lot of time talking about the million head backlog of cattle, but we have not spent a sufficient amount of time talking about, we've seen reduced placements for the 4 months this year, and have every expectation that we'll see an additional small decline in placements in the Cattle on Feed report on Friday. So when you take the culmination of those reduced placements year to date, that's on top of 1 million cattle. And that real decline in placements was in March, when placements were 23% below a year ago. If you just take the normal feeding period of those March placements, those cattle will start to market essentially in the middle of August. And so when you say, how are we going to get this backlog of cattle cleaned up by mid to late fourth quarter, we're going to see a very sharp reduction in our available supply of fed cattle starting in mid-August that will enable us to clean up that supply of fed cattle for the remainder of the year. All right, next slide. So the last chart that I'm going to talk about this evening is just to see how sharp that increase in cutout value was. When early in this presentation, and I was talking about that reduction in slaughter, and I'd never seen anything like it. I have never seen anything like this run in cutout values as well. When we ran that choice cutout to a weekly average of 451, or the average cutout to 451, I think the choice cutout 456, 457. The drive in that market at that time, because the majority of those sales were going through retail, that was driven primarily by thick meats and items that are conventional grocery store items, but also items, the chuck and round, that could go to ground beef. Middle meats came to the party later, but they were not rallying when this thing first took off, and we saw the severe. It was after the slowdown in slaughter that the middle meats started to take hold. If you go back and look now, and if you look at all of the primals as a percentage of cutout, we've essentially taken all of that premium out of the chucks, the rounds, to a large extent, briskets and the flanks. So the premium that's still in there today is largely attributable to the value of the rib and the loin. And I think that's had reason to hold support, certainly as we had that shopping with restaurants rebuilding inventories as they get to reopen. I think there's been support to middle meats in preparation for Father's Day, and some still for the 4th of July. But the point I'm trying to make with this is, I think as middle meats start to soften, the other primals have already done so, we'll probably see cutout back in that 210 to 215 level that is essentially where we were at when all of this started. And there's a lot of discussion that it could be something below the $2 mark before we buy back enough demand from the demand erosion from that high cutout level that it could take something below the $2 mark to get this market stabilized and recovering again. One last point, and I'm going to wrap this up. While those cutout values and the retail prices that were associated with them has caused tremendous sticker shock and complications in our market today, but I actually think there's potentially a silver lining in this, because when we took cutout values into that 250 level, or the $3 level back in 2015, prices came off, but they never went back to where they were before. Consumers got conditioned to those higher prices. It's going to take a while and to see the market level out, see cattle supplies tighten. But I think that now that we have seen the price levels that consumers are willing to spend, that when we see cattle supplies tighten up again, that will enable the market to go to retail prices that were higher than what we've seen in the past, that will be supportive on down the road. Next slide. So that's what I have for this evening. I'm going to turn things over to Derrell Peel, and then I think we'll take some questions later on.
All righty. Well, thank you, Don, for that. Appreciate that. That was a great overview of the sort of big picture of the market that we're working in. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you for letting me be a little part of this. Given what Don has just sort of painted for us as the big picture, I'm going to try to bring this down and give you some thoughts on kind of how you, as an individual producer, can think about going through this. Obviously, as Don said, we've run out of words to describe what we've been through and what we're still in terms of the unprecedented nature of this. Lots of risk in the market. There's continuing uncertainty. There will continue to be a lot of risk and volatility in these markets, and that's what everybody is struggling with a little bit on an individual level. So let me go through some things that kind of hopefully will get you to thinking about the right kinds of questions that you need to be asking and finding answers to for yourself as we go through this. So, again, in a very risky environment, the cattle industry on its best days has lots of dynamics, lots of moving parts, lots of challenges. But obviously, this is, again, something that we've never seen. So when you think about, how to manage through a situation like this, I'm going to go through kind of all of this stuff a little bit pretty quickly, because there's a lot of material here that could easily, several of them could warrant an entire workshop on their own. So I'm going to kind of hit the high spots and do it fairly fast. But, you need to focus on the appropriate level. And I'm going to go through that in the next slide, just to think about sort of where you are right now in this very unusual situation. What really are the issues that you need to be dealing with? You need to start earlier rather than later. In some cases, we haven't really seen where we're going to wind up marketing calves this fall. We don't know where we're going to be, but whatever. But the sooner we start, the sooner we sort of gather our information about our financial situation, about our overall business environment that we're in, do some assessment, and then take that and develop a plan for how we're going to get through this. And that's going to be one of my themes here, is that, you know, obviously this is going to be a year that we're really going to be focused as much as anything on just sort of getting through it, surviving the year. You know, it's not going to be the kind of year we thought it was when we started. And so the question is now, how do we get through that? And so we're going to, you know, develop a plan. We're going to bring in all of the relevant parties to that, from the family to the banker to maybe the broker, whoever else really needs to be a part of that discussion. And the sooner that you do that, the better chance you have to maintain some of the kind of flexibility that you're going to need to adjust to changing conditions, to be as nimble as you can from a production standpoint, from a management standpoint, and from a financial standpoint, to be able to get through this. So, you know, if you think about risk considerations, I'm going to not spend much time on these, but I'm going to start at a very high level. If you sort of put together all of the various risks that any business face and call it business risk, you know, at the end of the day, the big overall question is this business threatened with its very survival? You know, I would hope and certainly, you know, anticipate that not a lot of cattle operations are in this mode right now. There probably are some, and if that's where you are, that's where you got to focus the discussion. It's not about you know, whether I need to sell my calves at the local market or somewhere down the road. That would be the wrong level to be looking at this. So, you know, first question is, are we in a situation where we can survive this year? Below that, it will be the financial situation that we're in. If survival is not really a concern necessarily, but we certainly have a lot of potential for damage to our financial situation. I think that's where probably quite a lot of folks are this year. That comes from the market risk and the production risk we're going to talk about. But really it comes down to what sort of damage are we doing to the financial situation? Am I having to take on additional debt to get through this year? Am I having to restructure debt that I can't take care of in the short run? Those kinds of things. What are the short run implications, but also then what does that do in terms of my longer term situation? So that's all I'm going to say about that. We're going to focus on the things that lead into that in terms of the market risk, both in terms of the revenue side of the equation, the products that we're selling, the output prices. What can I do to manage risk there? I'm going to talk just a little bit about input markets and managing the cost side of the equation. And honestly, that's probably where you need to spend as much or more time as on the output side, even though I'm probably not going to talk about it as much tonight. And I'm not going to leave out production risk. You know, Don showed the drought map earlier. And certainly for, you know, there's some folks that are now in a drought and have been for some time. They're rapidly approaching, if not already in a situation where they're having to make some, you know, some drought related decisions. But if you look at the way that the drought area generally in the West and the Western Plains area has expanded in the last 3 weeks or so, there's a lot of potential for this drought situation, as Don indicated, to get worse. And so we really need to be thinking about that as well as we go forward. Managing risk, you know, again, we're trying to reduce or minimize those financial impacts. So we're going to talk a little bit about considerations for price risk, a little bit on the production risk side, and managing costs. You know, we'll talk a little bit that comes up as part of this is sort of what are we going to have to sell? When are we going to think about selling it? And that's going to lead us in from a cow-calf standpoint, thinking about some retained ownership considerations that will come into this as part of a marketing discussion, but also with a lot of production implications that we have to be aware of. Quick marketing workshop. This could be an entire semester class, and we'll do it in one slide here. But think about when you market a product, any business, really certainly any agricultural enterprise, when you market a product, there's really three things that happen in the process of marketing. Somewhere in that process, you establish a price for that product. There's a change of ownership from the seller to the buyer. And then there's a physical transfer of that product as a part of that process. And that sounds really obvious. You say, well, that's of course that's what happens. But what it comes down to when we think about price risk management, it involves separating these components so that we can do some things with some of them, but not necessarily all of them. And so when we look at various marketing impacts or marketing alternatives, the choice of those is going to determine or sort of set the stage for you know, what kind of potential we have to do risk management. So, you know, just in general, if we think about the simplest kind of marketing thing is, cash sales, load of cattle, go to the local market or wherever. In that situation, the cattle come in the ring, they get priced, there's a new owner, and when they go out the backside, they get on a different truck and go to a different operation. So those three marketing functions all happen at the same time in that situation. And there's really no opportunity for risk management in that. You can't sell cattle in an auction that you don't have yet. So you've been exposed to all the production or all of the market risk along the way while you were producing those cattle. And here you are, the market is what it is. You get what you get and you go on down the road. By itself, pretty limited in terms of risk management potential, but we will talk about how this can be combined with other market tools. So let's talk about forward selling then. As before we get to the end and have a product ready, is there something we can do to price these cattle or at least partially price them to help protect against that risk? We're spending a lot of production and cost of production to produce these animals. And so we think about something like a video auction, or maybe it's a direct sale from the ranch in terms of a forward contract with somebody that you talk to on the phone or somebody that drives in your driveway. And in that situation now, if you forward sell those cattle, you are determining the price, and the owner now, the physical transfer is going to happen at later. So it's June now. We've got spring-born calves on the ground. And we get a chance here maybe to forward sell these calves either through one of these methods and have them priced for October, November delivery. And so we've separated those marketing functions a little bit, and now we have eliminated much of the price risk in this case. We've established a price now for those cattle, so we're not subject to that price risk between now and the point of delivery. There's still some remaining risks out there, and there usually is. We don't get rid of all the risk. One of the things that goes along with forward selling in general is the fact that if we do forward sell these cattle to protect us against a market that goes south on us, and it does in fact do that, so the time when we need that contract the most to do what we wanted it to do, that also increases the odds that there could be performance risk or a contract default. And so it just emphasizes the fact that, there's legal risk in some of this. If we don't do business the way it should be done, we need to do written contracts and get down payments to ensure performance or at least offset some of the damage if in fact we do have some sort of default. The other thing that comes into any sort of forward selling discussion are the details of the terms of trade. And the devil really is indeed in the details. So we're going to have to, in addition to setting a price on these cattle, we're going to establish some sort of a base weight relative to that price. And then we're going to have to agree on things like shrink and weighing conditions, the price slides that we will use to adjust price if in fact we don't meet those target weights, those base weights. Those kinds of details become very important ultimately in how a forward contract really pencils out when it's all said and done. In terms of whether it really did what you intended for it to do. So those become an important part of this kind of a discussion. Then we can do what I'm going to call here an indirect price management, where we go to another market and take a position that would allow us in conjunction with our cash market business to help manage some of the price risk. So here we're talking largely about the futures market. We can go to that futures market and take a position now either as a hedger or using options to help establish, in conjunction with our cash marketing of a set of animals, we can establish a fixed or a minimum price. In that case, we're taking care of the price part of the marketing thing. We don't know yet who's going to own these cattle. We're not going to do the physical transfer until later. So now we've really focused on just that price part of the thing. And again, it's important to remember that, obviously it's a set of activities now that you net out to determine the outcome of this. If you take a futures position, typically, again, you trade a larger market risk for a smaller basis risk. That's certainly what you're counting on. Basis being the difference between your local cash market in some way that you're going to use it. Relative to that broader futures market contract price. and or an options price based on that. So you're still going to have basis risk. In some cases, there's the opportunity for a basis contract, which would be another step to actually then reduce that basis risk by establishing the basis through a contract. That's typically not an alternative for feeder cattle, certainly not for calves. In fact, futures markets in general are somewhat limited in their usefulness for marketing calves or for managing price risk in calves, simply because that feeder cattle contract, which is the closest thing we have, is actually not defined on calves. It's defined on bigger feeder cattle. So it's not a perfect tool, and there will be more basis risk in that situation. But what we've been through in the first half of this year with those kind of black swan events certainly serves to illustrate that that a tool like this would help kind of any kind of cattle to some extent. And so so that's kind of the way this would work if you use this sort of thing. I'm going to stick in a slide on retained ownership here as part of that discussion, kind of. If we typically sell weaned calves as a cow-calf operation, then we can think about retaining those calves in some sort of a stocker or backgrounding program to feeder cattle. That's going to change the timing of when those cattle will be ready to market, and it changes what we're marketing. We may not want to sell a 500-pound calf in October, depending on where the market is at that time, but we're not going to be then selling a 500-pound calf in February or March. We're going to be selling something bigger than that. And so there's those production components as well. We might take either weaned calves, depending on the type and size of the calves, or those bigger feeder cattle that we've already retained on into the feedlot. And that's another retained ownership step that we can take. There are marketing aspects to this because we are changing the market timing. And there are times when that's certainly one of the things that you want to consider. And again, we're changing the product. We're not selling the same thing now. So that means that we do have production aspects. Cattle are constantly changing. They're really perishable. That's the way I describe it. Cattle are perishable. They're constantly changing. You can't just stick them in the grain bin like grain and then sell it some months later. They're going to be something different by then. And so the production considerations become very, very important here. Most of what we do on a farm and ranch is really oriented towards generating returns to our biggest investment, which is the resource base, the forage base that we have. And so, retained ownership on the ranch in terms of a backgrounding or a stocker type program is really going to be evaluated relative to the best use of those resources and generating better returns to those resources. If you take cattle from there to the feedlot and it's not your feedlot, then that's a different situation. You're not generating returns to an asset base. That's really an investment decision, and that's probably the way it ought to be evaluated. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's a little bit different consideration. And out of these production and marketing components, it's been my observation generally that the production considerations are typically more important than the marketing considerations. And what I mean by that is that doing retained ownership just to change the timing of cattle in the marketplace, it can work, but it's not very often good enough by itself to make it worth doing unless the production part really makes sense. So I think you start with what you're doing as a production enterprise, the new demands that's going to put on resources, on management, on labor, and all of those things. Does that make sense? And really evaluate it from a production standpoint, and then also add in the marketing components as a part of that. Again, drought could be an entire workshop, and it may come to that here in the coming weeks, depending on what happens. I've got one slide here relative to production risk in the sense of drought. My number one advice is, again, start planning early. There are some things you can do to manage going into a drought and through a drought if you start early enough. And so you really need to know where you're at with your feed and forage situation. I put it in here so I wouldn't forget to at least mention it. We had LRP insurance over there on the price risk part. You may want to look at the pasture range and forage insurance here relative to the economic implications of drought. but you still got the management issues. And so, you know, we're going to be looking at where we're at, what's available, how fast are we going through it relative to a slowed down production process. And then we start thinking about what changes may be coming our way. And so we're going to be evaluating buying feed or forage. My number one comment there to most cattlemen that I've experienced for over many years is don't have a hay mentality necessarily. We typically want to go out and start buying hay without necessarily evaluating some other alternatives. And particularly when you think about the availability and the relatively attractive price on a lot of feed grains and other supplements, corn and other feed grains right now, there may be some decent alternatives. We don't often get that in a drought that we actually have abundant supplies of feed grains and so on. Are we going to relocate animals or find some additional pasture? How big is the drought area? Where are we going to have to go to do that? Does that make sense? You know, again, there's all of these things are probably going to be evaluated to some extent simultaneously, at least initially, to figure out sort of which way to go. For a summertime drought, one of the ways to stretch limited forage supplies that perhaps is easy to implement as anything is to early wean those calves. Now that may mean that you've got to make some marketing or backgrounding some retained ownership kind of decisions on the calves, but it will by reducing the lactation requirements on those cows early, you can really make a limited supply of forage go a lot farther in the second half of the summer in that situation. And then of course you may get to the point where you're faced with liquidating animals, and so before you get to that, you need to sit down and make a priority list by different classes, figure out what order things would get cut into. You're going to start with your cull cows, your open cows, and then think about your various classes from there, whether it's growing heifers or pregnant heifers or older but productive cow, whatever, and put those in some sort of priority order and determine what sort of decision triggers are going to get you to reach that decision. Droughts are, like a lot of things in our industry, very emotional, and it's very easy to get trapped into this, boy, I need to do this, but maybe it'll rain next week. And you put it off, and then pretty soon you just don't have any flexibility, and you wind up doing things that are potentially much more damaging financially and potentially damaging to the entire operation in the sense of the the animals, the forage resources, and so on. And that leads to the guiding principle at the bottom: maintaining a feed forage supply and demand balance. In other words, don't keep more mouths than you can take good care of. And that can work both ways. If you abuse the forage resource, you may pay for it for several years after the drought. If you abuse the animals and rough them through when you really couldn't take care of them, you may pay some longer term impacts in terms of reproductive performance. So it's better to plan early and not need it. A plan that never gets used really wasn't a waste of time, and it's sure going to pay off if you do in fact have to get into that to some extent. This follows kind of from that to some extent, at least in the sense of a drought, but in a more general sense. Input marketing probably doesn't get as much attention as it really should. At the end of the day, producers have a lot more ability to control the cost side of the profit equation than they do the revenue side. We've talked about some things to manage some price risk, and you can do those things, but at the end of the day, the market is what the market is, and you can't really change that overall market level. You may change where you're at in some range around that, but you really have more opportunity to manage costs. And so that's always advice in terms of managing that. Again, in a drought situation where we may be looking at more feed needs and all of that, the sooner you can make those determinations, maybe even go out and make some of those purchases before everybody else is doing it, may give you a chance to do it in a more economical fashion. And again, I want to emphasize in this particular situation that we find ourselves, look at those supplemental feeds carefully as a way to stretch limited forage supplies, but there's a lot of considerations to that. It generally is going to take a lot of labor, equipment to feed and store and to manage a different kind of limit feeding sort of thing that you might find yourself taking a look at in this situation. So the last bit, I'm going to wrap this up. That'll leave us a little time for some questions. You know, I'm going to end up a lot like Don did, I guess. You know, this is a very unprecedented situation. We're clearly on the defensive right now. We're focused on how to get through this. 2020 is at the best right now going to be a year to survive and get through, and then, you know, think about going beyond that. But I'm going to echo Don's comments in that, you know, we started the year with a modest amount of optimism in terms of not just prices, but prices as well as just the overall situation. The supply situation looked like, you know, we were sort of holding numbers steady to perhaps slightly tighter. Demand was good, both domestically and internationally. And those fundamentals are still there. They're just horribly masked right now by the situation we're in. And we are going to be in a recessionary situation for the rest of this year, I'm pretty sure. We may start to see by the end of the year kind of where the light at the end of the tunnel is. At least I would hope so. You know, so I don't think there's much, you know, to change kind of the path we're on for most of the rest of the year, whether we look at it from a supply standpoint as well as a demand standpoint. But at the same time, I think longer term, there is lots of reason to be optimistic about our potential. And, you know, there will be opportunities coming out of something like this. Volatility always creates opportunities as well as challenges. And so to the extent possible, you know, you want to try to maintain a situation where you're situated to capitalize on opportunities that are inevitably going to be there. Again, the timing is tough. We've never been through anything like this, so it's very difficult to talk very specifically about sort of exactly when and maybe even exactly in what form those opportunities are going to present themselves. But I have absolutely no doubt that they're going to be there. So that said, I'm going to stop it here, and Jesse, see if I guess I'm turning it over now to Michael from National Corn Growers for some comments at this point in time.
Thank you, guys. Quick thank you to all of our presenters for tonight's great presentations. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Granche, and I'm the Manager of Market Development for the National Corn Growers Association. On behalf of NCGA, thank you so much for having us here tonight and letting us be a part of this webinar. At NCGA, we're always happy to partner with NCBA for events like this to help circulate information to folks in the industry. Cattle is a critical customer for corn, and we're so appreciative of this partnership and excited for all the good work that lies ahead of us. The partnership between NCGA and NCBA is about bringing the latest relevant information to producers across the industry. Each of our presenters has clearly helped us achieve that goal tonight. As we move into our question and answer session, please remember to type your questions into the question chat box. Now let's get to your questions. Thank you again for participating in the webinar tonight, and I'll hand it over to Jesse Fulton, Director of Producer Education with NCBA, to moderate tonight's question and answer session.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Jesse Fulton. I am the Director of Producer Education here at NCBA. Just to reiterate, please chat in your questions over in the question box while we have our experts on with us tonight. We can try to get most of those answered. Before we get into that, I would just like to remind folks that we record all these webinars. So if you had any technical difficulty, you can definitely come back and rewatch it. Also remind that, you know, Derrell started talking about drought, and we had a webinar back on March the 24th, Managing Drought, Effective Mitigation Strategies. So I highly encourage you to go back and watch that recording if you missed that webinar for more strategies when managing drought. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the questions. Don, this one's for you right out the gate. You know, with the virus going on, and we're still seeing some spikes in the virus across the country now that the country is starting to reopen a little bit, there are plenty of consumers that are still fearful of that. So is it even, do you think we can get to a 190, 200 cutout? You know, keep that with consumers not eating in restaurants if they're afraid to go out? Especially, you know, fine dining.
I've been pleased with the rate of recovery to restaurant sales so far, and you know, certainly in St. Louis, we're just in that transition of going from 25% capacity to 50%. So we're starting to expand. The other part that I think is critically important with this is that with the unemployment levels where it is, but with the $600 a week stimulus money that has been attached to that unemployment check, 2/3 of the folks that are drawing unemployment today are making more money than, or taking home more money than they were when they were working. That's scheduled to expire at the end of July. But if you, and I don't know, what government's going to do, but certainly if you read the tea leaves, the expectations are that stimulus will continue. We're starting to get some talk of a stimulus to encourage people to go back to work. So as long as we're seeing the amount of government money going into the system as we're seeing at this point in time, I think we can hold together better than what you're thinking.
All right. Derrell, I'm going to come at you with this question. I want to invest in risk management as a cow-calf producer, but I have limited funds to spend. Do you have any recommendations or tools that I can use to compare the LRP versus the PRF?
There are some tools out there. I may have to sort of get back to you with specific, but I do know that there are decision aids probably in a number of states. I don't know where you're located. So you might start with your extension service wherever you're at, and they can probably guide you to some tools that can help you evaluate those things. So yes, there should be tools available. There were some recent changes to the LRP to make it a little bit more attractive. And so even if you've looked at it in the past, you may want to talk to one of the vendors that sell this product and kind of go through that discussion and that calculation again.
Okay, and Derrell, while we're on LRP, I saw in a headline that there were some changes coming to that program. Is that a more viable option than it used to be?
I think it is, and honestly, I haven't looked in great detail at it, but I do know that in terms of the cost, which was one of the previous questions, I believe they've done some things to help the subsidization of that product, and they've also made some changes that make it just a little more flexible for some folks to use. And of course, that's one of the attractions of LRP in general, is that it is more flexible for some producers where maybe the straight futures market, either because of the size, the numbers of animals, or other sort of rigidities associated with those contracts, kind of limits their usefulness. So yeah, I do think the LRP probably deserves another look if you haven't looked at it before, or if you haven't looked at it recently.
All right. At this point, I'm going to throw out some questions, and Derrell and Don, I think, feel free to each, if you both have thoughts on either one of the questions, please, go ahead and answer that. So my first one's going to be, take cattle to the market. What do I do if I can't even get a bid on my cattle? What would you suggest?
I'm going to guess that we're talking about fed cattle here.
Yes, sir.
And obviously, through the circumstances we've been through the last 2 months, we find ourselves in a situation now where we have this tremendous excess supply of fed cattle relative to any possible demand, even though we, as Don noted, we have done a remarkable job of getting slaughter capacity back online. And so, in the short run, there's not really a good answer to that in terms of the possibility that there may not be a demand. There simply is no way that the market can demand all of the cattle this week that need to be slaughtered this week, or that have been there for a month already, or longer in some cases, perhaps. So, it's going to be a question of holding on until such time as the demand can catch up, and that may take quite a few weeks on into the fall, as Don noted. That's my thought.
I wish I had a better answer. I would certainly be making nice with every packer buyer I had a phone number for. The one thing I would add to that, that what to do varies so much geographically, because there's, and the Corn Belt, there's still the fed cattle auctions and it's not a big volume thing, but that's still an option. And this one's going to take some time.
All right. You mentioned that we are in a backup and it's going to take a while to, work through that. Do any of you all know what the estimated backup is of fed cattle? And, we talked about how it'll probably be the fall before we get through that. How is that going to affect our feeder cattle placement going into October and December?
By October and December, I think we'll be in much better shape because of that the shortage of placements we've seen, particularly March and April, and how that will enable us to clean up during the fall. But availability of pen space is clearly going to be the big obstacle. My view on that one is, I think by the time we get to the end of the summer grazing season, that we will have better availability to move some feeder cattle, that in turn will create room. But my biggest worry today is having a place to go with the fall, these calves coming this fall, because I just think it's going to be a stair-step thing, that we got to get rid of the fats to get room for the feeders, and we got to get, to move the feeders to have room for the calves. So the lighter cattle have given me more worry than the feeders.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, and particularly, kind of in the northern regions where those weanling calves typically, are ready to go pretty much straight into the feedlot. They're going to be the last ones to kind of have a demand for, as Don indicated. So I think that's exactly right. Now, if you're talking about lightweight calves that are going to go out in some sort of winter grazing backgrounding type program, that may get us to next spring. Relative to the comments I made, that may be one of the reasons why a backgrounding or stocker, or retained backgrounding or stocker type program may look attractive this fall, because of that kind of a situation where it would get us a little ways farther down the road for those lighter weight cattle.
All right. So how about this one? If the beef cow herd stays the same, how much of an influence are we going to see with the dairy herd making, having their flow of beef calves coming in? How's that being taken into consideration?
That one's been really interesting, because when we first off, the non-fed plants have never seen the rate of reduction in operations that we've seen in the fed beef plants. So the cow kill has been much more normal than fed slaughter. But when it all started and we thought we would get this flush of beef cows, what we saw first was a real decline in beef cows, but a surge in dairy cows. And we've had some really very positive recovery in milk prices since this started. So as we've gone through May and into June, the number of dairy cows has declined, but as weather's gotten drier, we've seen that replaced with more beef cows. So the dairy people are cautiously optimistic and very pleased with the recovery. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that'll hold for a while.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. A lot of the concerns we had in the beef industry about the potential for the dairy industry weighing pretty heavily on us 2 months ago has really changed. That situation has changed pretty dramatically. So I don't see that as near the threat at this point. And the other point I was going to make about the overall kind of, especially towards the end of the year, remember what Don showed you in his very first slide in terms of where we are. Cattle numbers overall are basically flat to, somewhat smaller even than a year ago. So as we go forward, time is on our side here, that these supplies, they probably don't contract dramatically in a cyclical sense, at least not for 2020, but they don't continue to grow like they have for the last 4 years. So the overall supply situation is relatively friendly. We've just got all these timing bulges of first the fed cattle backlog, and then behind that the feeder cattle ripples that we've got with placements and so on. And if we can get through all of that, by the time we get to the middle or end of the fourth quarter, I think we get through a lot of that, and we're back on a much more, sort of stable looking, and barring some other change, and a little more, supportive kind of a supply situation from the standpoint of cattle numbers.
And one of the unintended consequences in this whole thing, when we went through 2 months of stay-at-home orders, carry-out pizza sales went through the roof, and subsequently cheese usage was way greater than expected.
Believe that. All right. So this next topic, NCBA has been quite vocal about. I know you two have been involved as well. We know there needs to be a change in how cattle are marketed. So what fundamental changes do you all predict or possibly see being made into the CME live and feeder cattle contracts, given the volatility we've seen this spring? I know that's a loaded question, but
we're both waiting for each other here. Relative to the futures contracts in particular, we continue to see, we've seen it sort of played out in dramatic fashion over the last 2 or 3 months. Most of the issues and concerns we have are much longer term than that, particularly with the feeder cattle market. That contract has been, somewhat marginal since the day it started, basically, and it's been aggravated by computer trading and other things. So we've got some long-term issues. We don't have any easy answers. I'll be the first to admit it. If we did, we would have implemented them a long time ago. It's going to continue to be an issue that we have to take a look at.
With the discussions with the CME, some of the discussions on proposed changes in the physical market, people have been frustrated, they have been mad, they have been confused, and this kind of a market is certainly well poised to bring out a lot of demonstration and voicing a lot of anger, and that we should make changes. I don't think we're deep enough through this as of yet to really have the vision to be recommending radical changes in the market, either cash or futures. I think it might be time to voice your opinion and be mad, but I don't think the industry collectively has the ability to make really good long-term decisions. We need more time.
Ditto.
All right. Couple more questions before we call it a night. With a lot of feed yards being in a tough spot, really ending up in the red in that sector, how's that going to impact their willingness to continue to fill pens, with a lot of them in a tough spot right now?
Well, again, Don, you get in this too, but feedlots, obviously, we have seen certainly illustrations many times in the past when feedlots are cash poor. It does impact to some extent their bidding, but again, longer term, they're in the cattle feeding business. In fact, a feedlot manager told me 40 years ago that it's a bed and breakfast, and they don't make any money if they don't feed breakfast. And so they're going to continue to buy cattle. They don't really have a choice. And if you factor in the supply dynamics and fundamentals that Don has talked about as we get towards through the summer and into the fall and into the fourth quarter, combine that with the relative attractiveness of feed prices and cost of gain, again, we've got some more tough sledding here for the summer period, but it's going to get better by the end of the year.
I think as we start to work through those numbers, as we see some better prices towards the fourth quarter, that will certainly provide a stimulus for the futures market. It will be looking at seasonal strength at that time, and most certainly you'd think provide some hedge opportunities that will encourage placements. What to do by weight class of cattle, I think we could talk the rest of the night. But one of the options that Derrell talked about that I think holds merit to certain weight classes of cattle is retained ownership. And when Derrell was talking about that, I was thinking that I think that's a viable option. But in his whole discussion of planning on a plan, checking with the feed yards and see if there is available space for the cattle is certainly part of that plan. That I wouldn't take that avenue and just with the assumption that I can find pen space any day I want it.
Yeah, good point.
All right. So I'm gonna get into the last two questions. I knew we probably wouldn't dodge this topic tonight. I knew we would want to dabble into it a little bit. So exports and imports, of course. NCBA is constantly working with USMEF, and we're trying to make sure we keep our export market thriving. So what influence on the market would we see with a robust export market? Something like China, could they take advantage of this black swan event entering into our beef market?
China's purchases of beef from both Australia and even New Zealand have been off markedly for the year to date. And when I first saw that taking place, I kept asking myself the question is, are they creating an opening to come in and buy quantities of U.S. beef that in order to fulfill their obligation on the phase one deal, they need to buy high value commodities? We could talk the rest of the week. Is the China deal on or off? But we had the announcement today, that they bought I don't know, 1 million metric tons of cotton or some large quantity of cotton. I'm not throwing in the towel on China yet, but I did say yet. But certainly some challenges there. I think the tariff agreement that we had with Japan last year and Taiwan, I think those puts the U.S. in a very positive position going forward. I think the USMCA is a good position. So I may not get the help as quickly as implied with the question, but I do think that the U.S. is very well positioned on the export front for the intermediate and the long-term game.
Yeah, I would echo that. Again, we're doing well generally in our two biggest markets, Japan and South Korea. China is still very small from a beef standpoint, but their protein needs are big. The phase one agreement requirements would suggest, as Don said, that they might be interested in purchasing some more. They don't have the available supply, plus they're in a political tiff with Australia right now. So there's all kinds of reasons to look for that market to grow. It's probably still going to be relatively small, but we could see significant growth in that market. USMCA is a good thing. It removes some uncertainty. The one area that I do have some concern about, though, is Mexico in general. Mexico is an important trading partner for us. Their economy is in shambles right now. And I am very concerned about that. That's one that I'll be watching closely. But in general, I think the trade situation in general for U.S. beef looks very favorable and may be one of the brighter spots as we move towards the end of the year.
Okay, now I have to flip it to the other side. You both mentioned USMCA. So imports of beef from Canada and Mexico, how, affecting our market price. What do you say to that?
Thank goodness we have them.
Yep.
Again, when you start talking about particularly the imports and trying to understand why we import, and we're such a big producing country, you have to recognize that when we talk about beef or beef demand, that makes it sound simple, and it's not simple. It's a vast array of products. Markets do their best to balance out the best value potential in each of those individual markets. The beef industry ultimately produces, many thousands of different products. And so the imports fill a specific niche relative to our tremendous ground beef market in the U.S. in general. Now, the imports from Mexico tend to be more muscle cuts. They fit a specific market niche in the U.S. Retail markets. But in general, the imports are there because they provide additional value for a specific set of products, just like our exports provide additional value for a specific set of products.
With 82% of our beef production being fed beef, we create a mountain of 50s. And the U.S. has an insatiable appetite for QSR burgers. And we do not have a non-fed slaughter or cow slaughter that is large enough to produce the lean quantity that's needed to meet that QSR demand. And it provides us a window of opportunity to sell 50% trimmings at a substantially higher price than we could instead of that product going to rendering. So it is that, and we're only talking, roughly 10% of the U.S. beef supply is imported product, but it is actually a classic case of when we trade, we all win, because it actually improves the value of our fed cattle because it gives us an avenue to use those 50s.
Absolutely.
I know I said that was going to be my last question, but where you went with that, Don, on that we do not produce enough trim here. One argument I constantly see is we have the cull cows here, and that would help our cull cow price. Can you kind of go into, or both of you, on what the effects would be if we only relied on our cull cows, and if we tried to increase killing more cull cows, what that would happen to our cow herd?
Well, I think you just answered the question from my standpoint. By my estimates, we would have to basically double cull cow slaughter in the U.S. to not need any imported beef to meet that lean demand that Don was talking about. That obviously would not be sustainable in terms of maintaining our herds from that standpoint. And so you make the argument, if we didn't import, would it make our cull cows worth more? It would make them worth more. We would produce a lot less ground beef. We would be less competitive against pork and poultry in particular in the fast food industry, because burger prices would have to go up, and we would wind up, as Don said, rendering or sending to pet food all of those other 50% trimmings that we would not be able to use for lack of additional lean.
I know people don't like it when I say this, but it's very true. That trade's not a one-way street, and I'm not going to go into the whole global trade thing at all. But I just don't see how we want to sell our products to everybody globally, but we're not willing to at least trade with them on products that they have that are in excess. And as I've already said, this is a particular case where it actually increases the value of our fed cattle because it gives us a price for those 50s. Yeah. I'm going to totally derail here. And when I was talking about that run up and cutout that I had never seen before in all the years I've been in the business, at one point in time in that rally, the price of 50% trimmings were actually trading at a premium to 90% lean trimmings. And I have never seen that before.
Yeah.
All right. I think that does it for questions with us tonight. For those of you that are still on, I would like to remind you that we have another webinar series coming up in July on focusing on mineral supplementation, where we'll open up the series with the basics for beef cattle. Then we'll talk a little bit more about reading between the lines of mineral tags, and then we'll take a deeper dive on the influence of mineral supplementation on beef cow reproduction and the influence it has on immune response, especially directed that at a vaccine immune response. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was a great presentation. For those of you that are still on, the recording will be available tomorrow. Please take it and share it on your social media so we can get the message out there. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.